Blog Talk Radio.
On September the 30th, 2013, this is BR on the World and International Affairs program that brings current news, commentary, and whatever else we can throw in, quite literally and figuratively. It's very interesting that in the U.S. we have to refer to a news program as international. What that basically means is the U.S. is news-centric. In other words, a nation that is consumed with news of itself, and very sparse news, as my colleague Jerry Pippin pointed out last night on Bostonred and his Pippin Network. It's an unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in, that with the news outlets that we have across this vast country known as the United States, we in effect have very little news. The substance is not there. News is used as entertainment in the U.S. We at one time started out, I'm old enough to remember, with national newscasts on NBC and CBS called the Huntley-Brinkley Report. That was on the National Broadcasting Company. And the Columbia Broadcasting Company had a gentleman named Walter Cronkite. And it was just 15 minutes. Then it was expanded to 30 minutes. And they even experimented the American Broadcasting Company with an hour format. That was quickly done away with. They had morning shows, just like in the UK, you have your breakfast hour, etc., and across the world. But what happened was that the local newscast and the national newscast, there were a few consultants out there, and they had what we call in the U.S. a cookie cutter format. In other words, if you were in Los Angeles or Boise, Idaho, or Shreveport, Louisiana, you saw the same newscasts. The only thing changed was the newscasters and the city. The talking heads were there, usually young people, usually a man and a woman, and in certain instances a person of color was thrown in for color. That was in the late 60s, early 70s. People of color have disappeared, at least for the most part, from most national and local newscasts. And that is an important development, because what has basically happened is that Professor Reed, Ishmael Reed, has talked about this. The boogeyman syndrome is alive and well. In other words, the only time you see people of color on the news, whether they be African Americans, Latinos, doesn't matter from which which nationality they come. They could be Dominicans, they could be from Colombia, Venezuela, whatever. If they are people of color, they are cast in a negative light. This is a state of U.S. news, and it's only amplified by what we call the specialty networks, HBO, etc. HBO, the CNNs, they have a special projects. In fact, CNN decided to abandon a special mini-series on the former First Lady, the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, because the Clinton people would not talk to them. So we have those kinds of situations coming up all the time. And then we have this massive cable network set up where you have 200 or 300 different channels, too numerous to name, from the HBOs of the world to the National Geographics, the Bravos, and everybody in between. They also have special projects, and many of them tend to at least mimic the news or world events. And this also brings Hollywood into it. On the BBC site, it talks about how Hollywood helped the Nazis. So we'll go to the Guardian newspaper. We'll jump around a bit here, but we'll start with Golden Dawn. Golden Dawn is a fascist-type organization. They call it a far right, but nonetheless, the parliamentary spokesman Christos Pappas surrendered to the Greek police. He is now in literally the arms of men that have on masks. I guess a Greek Special Forces outfit. And I'll just read the dispatch. A Greek MP said to be the second in command of the fascist party Golden Dawn has surrendered after authorities arrested the organization's leader and key members on charge of running a criminal gang. Christos Pappas, the party's parliamentary spokesman, handed himself over to police more than 24 hours after the president cracked down on the group. Appearing in the Athens Central Police Station in a taxi, the politician insisted vehemently the anti-immigration party would survive the political persecution it's being subjected to. Well, they may survive, but not with the present leadership. I present myself voluntarily. I have nothing to hide, nothing to fear, he told reporters outside the building where 5 other Golden Dawn people, MPs, including Nikos Malitakos, its leader, were taken into custody on Saturday. Nationalism will win, he says. We will win a non-stop political struggle, and we will survive. Well, whether or not he survives or not, a lot of this has to do with the globalization of the Greek economy. Greece is dependent upon the EU and the EU zone in the international monetary fund there for its very survival. Therefore, these nationalistic parties were a thing of the past. One of the things that these neo-fascist or fascist parties have to understand is, in the present day globalization, nationalism tends to be less and less if a country is globalized, or in the case of Greece, forced to globalize. It is part of the euro. It's a very small country. Much of their economy is localized. It's in farming, small shops. They do have tourism. Very little manufacturing in Greece. So Greece is a perfect match for the eurozone and to be part of it. Now, in the eurozone, Greece is not alone. Germany has a large fascist contingent left over from the war, and so does Italy, so does Spain, and so does the UK. These fascist gangs are basically, I guess you would say, the little brothers and little sisters of the right-wing parties in these countries. As long as you have these right-of-center parties, as you do in Germany, as you do the Conservative Party in the UK, you will have these fascist gangs running amok. But in Greece, they went one step further there. They actually killed someone. In the U.S., we have these fascist gangs killing people all the time. But many times it is under authority or color of law. It is very easy for anyone that has the same political values as Golden Dawn to join any police department across the U.S. And we've had instances of various people of nature. One was pointed out during the so-called trial of the century when the all-American hero O.J. Simpson was tried, and we had a character that is now, quote-unquote, a police analyst named Mark the Racist Dog Thurman. The racist dog was a detective in Los Angeles, since retired, moved to Idaho with the other white supremacists. But one has to understand that in the U.S. these things go along without much fanfare. We had in the northern part of the U.S., in a state called North Dakota, in a town called Lett, that a white supremacist moved into this little town of less than 20 people, bought up some land. He was living, as we'd say, rough. He didn't have out and indoor plumbing. He was going outdoors to what is referred to in the Midwest as a privy. And his properties are in the process now of condemnation, of being condemned. Had a massive demonstration there. He also invited the National Socialist Party, or Socialist Movement as they call themselves, a fascist party, the same as this Golden Dawn. They have not been directly tied to murders, but their offshoots, various Aryan nations, etc., have killed people of color. But a lot of it in the U.S. and, of course, in Greece, too, is centered in police departments. In New York, a very large city, here on the East Coast, we have something called stop and frisk. Is an open market on people of color who are the majority of the city of 10 million people. So, in other words, in Greece, if they can get away with this, so can they here on the color, and it's a much larger nation. Greece is a small nation. This is a 300 million plus nation. That the security forces are up as far as one can go in terms of security. More police departments, better equipment. They have SWAT teams, etc. And in many places, the SWAT teams are the Golden Dawns of the world. They are the ones that enforce the edicts of the racists. In fact, in one Midwest department, some of the officers there said they had the right to use the N-word as freedom of speech and as quote-unquote white men. The Golden Dawn didn't go quite that far out in the open, but it is one of the things that you face in a modern-day society that is controlled by monopoly media and the far right. We did a program on politics and sport. Most of the owners in the American version of football, the National Football League, are far right types. So they interject their ideology across the sphere. We move on to Italy. Silvio Berlusconi faced a rebellion from his own allies after pulling out of a coalition. He is another media mogul who runs a monopoly operation in Italy. The same thing as Murdoch in the U.S. and in Australia. So now the government will be, of course, faced with a no competence. So thus, the whole health of the Eurozone is again at question. In Greece, it's the third largest economy there. Enrico Letta said on Sunday that a parliamentary vote, probably on Wednesday, was needed in order to clarify whether the 5-month-old government still has numbers to continue. Greece, of course, has a parliamentary system, and it is one of those situations that happens. Everyone will assume their responsibility, he said in the interview with the state broadcaster, a country well known for volatile politics, no doubt about that, and recurring crisis remnants of the film Groundhog Day. Confirmation of vote, which has been suggested last week by increasing irritants and embattled Prime Minister, came after Berlusconi appeared to soften his do-or-die stance. Very similar to what's happened in the U.S. The U.S. government will close down tonight because of the same basic situation. So Letters, whose allies are trying to see if an alternative parliamentary majority can be found, enable him as a Democratic Party Prime Minister. The People of Freedom Party might be there. They have a lot of minor parties, but they're to the right of center. And no doubt Berlusconi, he's 77 years old and he's still in the game. So he is, I believe, older than Murdoch, or basically about the same. So that is the news from Italy. They always talk about in emerging nations of disorganization. You see it in the third largest economy there, and it will continue to go. We go now to Turkey. The Prime Minister there, Erdogan, is now opening up things, flirting with more what they call demilitarization. He unveiled a package of liberalizing reforms in years on Monday, making overtures to the larger Kurdish community. There are Kurds, of course, in Turkey. They're about 20% of the population. They're also in Germany, proposing that headscarf women be allowed to sit in parliament, work as civil servants for the first time in the history of the Turkish Republic. The proposal has been repeatedly delayed due to potential incendiary impact following a summer of the largest and most persistent anti-government protests. Erdogan has been in power for 11 years. He spoke in Ankara. He announced that the headset ban would be lifted for women in public office, except those that required uniforms such as military, police, and courts. The ban has long been one of the most contentious laws in Turkey. The reforms aimed at keeping on track the peace process between the government and the Kurdish Workers' Party, PKK, to bring to end one of the longest-running ethnic conflicts, costing 40,000 lives over 30 years. So this has been a situation, and also lowering the threshold of a political party entering Parliament from 15% to 5%. So thus it would enable the Peace and Democratic Party, that's the main Kurdish party, to receive cash and, of course, to be in there. It would allow the mother tongue education in private school. Kurds are estimated at, this is from The Guardian, at 20%. They could be educated in their own, they call it tongue. The chair of the pro-Kurdish BPP said the package failed to meet their expectations. Kurds wish for Kurdish problems to be solved. Largest religious minority wish for freedom of religion and other discriminatory acts. Turkey is, of course, a Muslim nation, and many critics of Erdogan's failure to address the more sensitive minority issues, Kurdish language education in state schools, remains impossible, and the Prime Minister barely made any concessions to greater religious and cultural freedoms for the Aviki minority. He also failed to resolve the Greek Orthodox Church monastery near Istanbul to its to its owners. The package is completely cosmetic, and so it will go on here. I guess there are 10 million Kurds. It's 20%. Oh, anyway. So the Kurds rock on in Turkey. Nothing particularly solved there that's brought to light anything. Shut down in the U.S. And one final item here we want to get to. The NSA stores metadata on millions of web users for up to a year. Secret Files show. I think we reported on this. Storing metadata on millions of internet users, regardless of whether or not they are persons of interest or not. Provides a record of almost everything the user does online. That has been out there. And the New York Times, we talked about that report on the metadata. We won't talk about it here. But that was it's a separate situation there. Documents cited major tech providers, internet carriers, have 1.82 petabytes of information per day. Petabytes, according to Gizmo, is equivalent to over 13 years of HD TV video. It's enormous. In its foreign intelligence mission, the NSA touches about 1.6% of that. The document says, however, 1.6% is only 0.025 there for review. But they have very large storage, and they are building more data centers. Maryland professor and internet commentator Jeff Jarvis. Very rough, beer-soaked napkin numbers. The NSA's 1.6 net traffic would be half the communications on the net. Well, no doubt about that. And that's carried out under the FICA courts, so-called backdoor search loopholes. That's another rule they've got going. So, in other words, the NSA is running amok. This does it for the news in 10. Here we managed to cover from Turkey to Greece and its fascists, to the U.S. and its police departments, to Italy and its dysfunctional government, all in one show. We'll talk to you on Tuesday. Good day.